The milestone I'm going to discuss today is not subscribers count or followers count, although I'm very grateful for all the people who actually follow my work. But today's milestone is going to be talking about the video making process and what I actually learned from making 100 videos throughout my channel. And I hope to simultaneously share some lessons that people will benefit from when trying to make videos in the future. And I do think a good way to start is to divide these things into internal things that I learned between me and myself, and then external things I learned about the world through actually the process of making videos. Now, the first internal, perhaps very important lesson to share is that the video making process in and of itself has helped me shape my speech, how to convey my thoughts in a clear way, because I think we usually think in the form of conversations where we're sitting with people, we're talking, but in the video making process, you're actually having a kind of a monologue. So you're forced to have a one train of thought to convey your ideas. And that one train of thought will actually help you when you're writing or when you're actually trying to think through a topic. And in another sense, it kind of improves attention span to a certain degree when it comes to the world of ideas and deconstructing ideas, because as I said, that one train of thought will help you take or compile the whole of the idea and try to deconstruct it to understand it more. So from that internal perspective, it didn't only help me through my speech, but it also helped me through my way of thinking to a certain extent. And I do think one underrated part about the video making process is people thinking that it's externally incentivized, meaning that you need to get attention in order to benefit from the video making process. But I disagree to a certain extent. I think it could be an internally incentivized process where you're actually learning a lot of things in that process. So even if you don't get a lot of quote unquote views, you're still internally incentivizing yourself with all these different principles of thought, let's say. So I do think this is an important part to also mention when it comes to content creators and quitting, because if you look at the video making process as an internally incentivized process where you're actually learning how to think, then that increases your threshold towards quitting the game. Now, the second thing I learned through my video making process, which might seem like an extension of the first point, is that it's very crucial and necessary to engage my thoughts in order to actually learn. I used to think that one could actually learn so much through reading and listening, but I've realized that staying in the hallways of a library and just reading or listening is not really enough to learn, because you have to engage with those ideas and try to take a back and forth stance with your ideas. Otherwise, you're not really learning to a certain extent. So I do think engaging your ideas, and I've mentioned this before, where I think also the medium you share your ideas through is pretty important as well, where writing has a specific benefits that are not accessible through speaking and vice versa. So I do think the different medium one shares his or her thoughts through is pretty important in this context as well, where it actually crystallizes the learning process. And I think it's necessary rather than an additional thing to do. This takes us to the third notion or concept I learned from making 100 videos. And the idea is that new information is not really necessary for people to learn new things. And I know this sounds paradoxical, but I used to think that new information is required for people to learn new things and have new insights. But nowadays, the way I think about it is that there are also subconscious thoughts that lie into people's heads where you need to remind them of it to a certain extent. So it's not necessarily tackling things that people don't know, but also reminding people of the things that lie into their subconscious to a certain extent might also give rise to new insights. So for example, I used to think that if a certain content creator is talking about a certain topic, then I don't really need to delve into it because they've already covered the topic in a very good way. But nowadays, when I think about it, I think to myself, what if I repeat this idea? Maybe it actually speaks to someone's subconscious idea, even if they knew the information, for instance. Maybe it could speak to their subconscious mind and change an insight and make them do a specific action, for instance. So new information and repetition of information are pretty valuable in all contexts. So even if my channel speaks about a certain topic, in the beginning, I used to think that it's not really wise to open up the topic again. But now when I think about it, I'm like, repetition actually could speak to someone's subconscious and give rise to new insights. So repeating the ideas is also something that could be encouraged and insightful. So now that we covered a few internal notions I learned, let's move on to some external things I've learned through my video making process. Now, this first external one might actually seem like it's not wise or the most wise thing to do, but nowadays when I reflect upon it, I think taking the criticism and the quote-unquote hate and thinking about it intellectually might be a wise thing to do, because I think a lot of people have this notion where they want to quote-unquote ignore the hate, and I do understand that ignoring the hate psychologically is a pretty wise thing to do, of course, and not absorbing it. But sometimes the hateful comment might have some valid points that will change your world and change your conceptions. So actually taking the arguments and trying to dissect them, if possible, of course, is or might be a wise thing to do. But I do want to say something personal where I have an ability to detach the psychological aspect of it and not really care about the hate to a certain extent, as long as I know that my intentions are good and I recheck my intentions. However, I have the ability to just detach the intellectual argument and try to unpack it to a certain extent. So I wouldn't encourage this approach where someone actually gets distressed psychologically from hate. But in my case, I think I can take the psychological hate. It's not an issue for me. And at the same time, unpack the intellectual argument. The second external notion I learned is that people actually focus on a lot of details without knowing it. And that actually teaches you about marketing, where changing small things might actually change the whole thing. And I know this sounds like a common thing to know, but at the same time, you don't really internalize it until you start to make videos and you change a very small, let's say, detail, and the retention goes up 100%. So I do think just focusing on the details, I guess the lesson to extract here is that never undermine the details in this, let's say, process or any other process. So I do think this is an interesting part of, let's say, human nature, where people focus on details without actually knowing it. And I do think it works to discern or unpack this idea and think about it from a marketing perspective as well. The third and last concept I want to talk about is the idea of overthinking. Now, I want to make it clear and say that I don't think overthinking is always bad. You could overthink fundamental questions and try to improve your thought process through overthinking. But there is a kind of bad overthinking where it cripples your actions. And I do think the video making process actually improves that overthinking or that crippling overthinking, because you're kind of iterating a process and putting it to the public, and you're realizing that really the details you used to care about too much and spend a lot of time into do not really matter at the end of the day. So I do think this is one lesson I've learned from the video making process when it comes to the external world, let's say, where I learned that my overthinking in my head sometimes, or the crippling type of overthinking, does not really do any good at the end of the day, especially when people don't really care about the things you overthink most of the times. If you like the content of this video, you'll probably like other content I publish in this channel, where I talk about philosophy, psychology, complexity, and all these different intellectual ideas. My line of interest is pretty broad, and I like different intellectual ideas. So if you're interested in that specific exploration, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and see you next time.